Hi, this is Kevin/Patrick. I'm a part of the system. Here to talk about our experience with Alcoholics Anonymous and why we have left it. This is an extremely painful video for us to make, and it's scary. If we thought that speaking out about the satanic, mind control, government-affiliated cult we grew up in was frightening, speaking out, not exactly against, but saying negative things about Alcoholics Anonymous is actually in some ways more frightening. I think it's fresher for us still. So, where are we going to even begin? We are 21 years old. We were born into drug and alcohol addiction, raised on myriad substances, including meth, heroin, crack cocaine, and alcohol. We started seeking sobriety by ourselves desperately at 14 and started going to Alcoholics Anonymous when we were 15. We finally had a rock bottom spiritual experience. It was a total cliche, and it was horribly painful, and yet it was wonderful. We woke up out of our drug addiction and our mind control, as we're an MK Ultra survivor, and we sought treatment at a drug and alcohol treatment center over 1,000 miles away from where we were living. And after 2 short stints there, we were able to get sober and stay sober. That was 4 years ago. We've been sober since. And for most of this time, we have been a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. However, we really started to drift from that program and leave it about a year ago. We have also been a member of another 12-step program for survivors of child abuse, which we won't name because we still consider ourselves a part of that group, even though we can't actually attend it right now because of where we live and monetary limitations. But we would be if we could. So we want to be clear that our intent is to stay in 12-step recovery, just in a different group than AA. So in this video, we want to explain some reasons why we have left it. We speak from the perspective of an MK Ultra survivor, and we hope that this video will be uniquely helpful to people who have survived trauma-based mind control programming, who are trying to free themselves, or have successfully done so, and who are also in recovery or seeking recovery from drug addiction and alcoholism. It is a very common held belief, at least in the United States, that Alcoholics Anonymous is the place to go if you're an alcoholic to get sober. A lot of the courts mandate it, and while there has been a lot of controversy about it and whether or not it's a cult, it seems like most people in the general public agree that, or believe that AA is a good place. And I'm not actually saying that it's bad. I don't like the terms good and bad, and I'm not here to bash on it. But there are issues. Some people have spoken out about it publicly. There have been articles written. I'm going to put a link in the description below to an article that I was just reading this morning about it that inspired me to make this video. And it was about specifically mind control techniques used by Alcoholics Anonymous. Of course, as a mind control survivor, that piques my interest. But I am well aware. Whether or not you want to actually call AA a cult, there are things about it that are cult-like. And scholars have different definitions of cults and have gotten into arguments about it with AA in the past and in the present, I think. I'm sure it's still an ongoing debate. There are undeniably things about it that are cult-like. Some groups more so than others, and that is part of what makes it difficult to define the nature of Alcoholics Anonymous and whether it's a cult and whether it's safe, is because there's not one group. There are myriad groups all over the world that practice the program differently. Some groups, in my experience, would definitely by themselves be considered cults, And other groups seem like friendly discussions where people sit in meditation and then discuss inner peace in long-term recovery. And it couldn't seem more pleasant and more positive. So trying to make any grand sweeping statements about the program for me is difficult when it comes to the groups themselves. It's easier to analyze the text. It's easier to analyze the literature as officially printed by the global organizations, or organization. I think the World Service Organization. I'm not sure. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous drives me nuts. It rambles on with emotional, flowery language that is difficult for me to understand. I know most of the words in that book. I might know all of them now as I studied it, but it's difficult for me to pinpoint what it is it's really saying and suggesting. I found a lot of contradictions in it. There's a lot of black and white statements, a lot of very emphatic language. I think they use the word emphatic in that book. It's zealous. It's hard for me to cope with as a cult survivor, as someone who was born into a destructive cult that used mind control. I prefer the text of the 12-step group for survivors of child abuse that I still consider myself to be a part of, as it is a lot more objective, a lot more psychoanalytic, and yet at the same time deeply spiritual. It gives a more practical outline for how to achieve that spiritual connection. In that program, it is about the inner child and healing from childhood trauma. That to me is where my recovery lies, and that is where I have a huge problem with AA. I may be an alcoholic and a drug addict, but that is not where my core issues lie. The big book of AA itself says that alcohol is but a symptom, and I agree. However, I think it is given too much credit by a lot of people in the rooms of AA, and not enough attention is placed on core issues of codependence, child abuse, and the like, trauma. I'm not saying that AA should be therapy or that AA should be professionally run. I like the traditions. I like the way that it is structured in that sense. But I think that willful ignorance is a problem. And I saw a lot of that in AA. There's not much talk about child abuse and not much talk about codependence. There's a lot of denial. And I received a lot of shaming when I would come into the rooms and try to talk about my post-traumatic stress, my dissociation, and my child abuse history. I came into the rooms as a child, trying to work the steps. So what I had to work the steps around was my childhood. That's literally what I have to work the steps around, is my childhood. My entire drinking and using happened before the age of 18. And I don't think that actually sets me apart on a core level. I think that adults who had long-term drinking careers in adulthood still have core issues from childhood that they would probably benefit from making the focus of their recovery. I'm not saying don't focus on what you did as an adult, but outside the context of family dysfunction, I just don't know how you can achieve real recovery and emotional sobriety from addiction and alcoholism. So that was a big issue for me. I found there was a lot of contention in AA, in the groups that I was attending. People just did not want to accept that child abuse was a real core issue and childhood trauma was worth looking at. This made it feel very difficult for me to share because I was overflowing with trauma at the time. I was becoming deeply conscious of my experiences in mind control, and while I tried really hard to temper what I said in the meeting so as not to scare anyone and not make myself unsafe, not, give secondary trauma to people. When I opened up about those issues as they related to my alcoholism, when I opened up to having been a survivor of organized child abuse, finally, partway through my recovery, I started talking about it in meetings. Oh, the tension in the room was painful. And I just didn't find it to be a climate that I could recover in. I tried really hard to separate what I considered to be my outside issues, quote unquote, from my alcoholism, but that just seemed ridiculous because to me there really are no outside issues. Whatever issues contribute to and fuel your drinking are part of your alcoholism. That is what I believe. That the sum total of your life experience, that everything you think, feel, and do is interrelated somehow with your addiction. And certainly trying to say that childhood trauma is an outside issue for compulsive behavior, it just seems ridiculous to me. Another big issue that I faced, I don't know if I mentioned in this video, this is the multiple take I'm trying to take of this, is being a young person in the rooms. Being a teenager in AA opened me up to a lot of sexual and emotional predation. I've never been someone's 13th step. I have never submitted to that or gotten sucked into that. I have, however, been emotionally preyed on badly, and people have tried to 13th step me in ways that were really painful and hurtful. And I'm not talking about just a single pass at me from a creepy old man in the room. I'm talking about people who got to know me, old-timers who got to know me for a long time. One in particular I'm talking about before he tried to prey on me. And it hurt bad. And it traumatized me badly. And just because I was not, as far as I can remember, actually raped by that person, I might as well have been. I felt soul raped. I felt so used and so degraded. I had opened myself up to this person deeply and chosen to trust someone with time in the rooms who I really thought that I could. And it wasn't so. And another huge issue for me with that was the shaming towards me as a female for even engaging with men in the rooms. I was told women stick with women, men stick with men. As a non-binary, transgender, pansexual person, that doesn't work for me. I can't stick with one gender. I find it safer for me in many ways to engage with men about my recovery because I actually have a sexual preference for women and an emotional romantic preference for women that I feel is more likely to get in the way of my relationships with friends, with female friends. I'm currently in a monogamous relationship with a male partner, and so that's less of an issue, but that doesn't mean that feelings can't develop, and that doesn't mean that I don't have to be careful. And I've just learned in general I do better being friends with men, given the way I identify, even though I do have attraction to men as well. That doesn't mean that I don't have to be careful with men developing those feelings for me or trying to prey on me, but to say that I need to only associate with other females, it's too binary, it's too limiting. It doesn't actually take into account my experiences as a queer trans person. And so I found very little support around being 13th-stepped because if I had a male friend that tried to prey on me, I was told, well, what are you doing associating with men? And it was basically put back on me and it hurt. I'm not saying I never got any support, but the general attitude was painful. I was told, well, why didn't you just go to women's meetings? And when I would say that women's meetings are not a safe space for me because of how I identify, it was bad. And one might be asking why I didn't go to LGBT meetings. I did. And I found one in particular that was one night a week that was really good for me. That wasn't, however, enough. When I was really trying to do the program, I couldn't just go once a week. And there was one other LGBT meeting in the area I was in that was also a great meeting. But it was mostly older gay men. And while none of them tried to prey on me, I didn't find much connection with them either. They're mostly cisgender, as far as I knew, and I just didn't experience the acceptance and connection that I needed. I don't know if I talked about this in this video, but I've also had a huge issue with trying to find connection with young people in AA through the young people's meetings. I talked about being a young person and the rejection that I faced by older people. Well, I also faced that with younger people. I did not find the fellowship that I needed from the young people in AA in the area that I was in. I think the reasons why might be obvious. In case you haven't noticed, I'm not your average young person. I have an IQ score of 187, and I spent most of my life in a trafficking ring. I am also, like I've said a million times in this video, queer and trans. I'm not willing to dumb myself down to fit in. That was the last thing that I needed to do in trying to get sober, was to hide myself and join another clique. I'd already been in one. I didn't need a new one. I had a rough time trying to make friends in the young people's groups. And, for a time I also tried to just not make friends and just go. But I found it too painful. I felt too lonely. It was too isolating. As long as I was going to AA, I was going to try to make friends and fellowship. And not having a fellowship just undermined the whole thing for me. Not having safe sponsorship undermined the whole thing for me. And the traumas of being preyed on, it just wasn't worth it. So many times I'd sit in the meetings and I'd realize that so much of what I heard sounded like bullshit and I just wasn't getting what I needed. And it wasn't just me going to the meetings trying to get something. I gave and I gave and I gave. I gave a lot. I think a lot of what I had to give wasn't exactly welcome because of the type of recovery I had with inner child work. And I think that I just couldn't help but be myself and show myself. And I just couldn't help but show a level of vulnerability that I just don't think made people comfortable. So those are some reasons why I have left AA. And I'm going to make another video after I post this. I would make it right now, but I don't have storage space on my phone, about what my recovery looks like now without it. Thank you.